Hey team, it's the 13th of May. This is Cardano Go Live Coding session number 9. And we were just talking offline. Today is actually the date that Fund 12 Catalyst proposals are due. Once they're in the idea scale system, proposers have a couple of days to finish those up. So I know we're going to be polishing things off over the next few days. But one of the reasons we get together here, other than that, it's fun and we're building meaningful stuff, is that we are delivering on a Fund 11 Catalyst proposal with these weekly sessions. So a few of the outputs for that project, I think, are really relevant to right now. And I think we've already made some good progress on this. But I think now is a really good time to start thinking into details and sketching out what we're going to accomplish over the next few months. So one thing we promised for the next milestone that we'll submit are documented examples for a few tools. And we named specifically in the milestone having simple examples for Apollo, for SNEC, which is now called Adder, and for Bursa. So more on that in just a second, because down here we also know that the Blink Labs team has been creating some starter kits, posting those on Demeter, and then there's even the Builderfest workshop code. So delivering these is one priority. And then the other thing we promised for this milestone is a roadmap of what we're going to finish in Andamio CLI. So we can jump into a few of these things. But what's really cool is that we've talked about all of this in one way or another over the last few weeks. And a lot of this is just an exercise in gathering what we already have, maybe slapping a little, a template on it so it's easy for people to read. And there's a few places where we can do that. But yeah, I wanted to get advice on what order we can introduce all of this, what's best to work on first, and maybe even get into starting to outline the actual Cardano Go PBL course. And Chris and I had a good time talking about this when we were in person at the Build Fest. Finally, at the bottom of my list, Mix, you mentioned a few sessions ago the zero withdraw trick, and you teased it in a very short amount of time at the end of the last session. But I know that's something that's been on your mind, and maybe that's something that we get to in an upcoming live coding session. So that's kind of
Yeah,
my
we can
main
say like
note. Yeah.
it can have its own section like optimization or new tricks or tips and tricks in
Yeah.
Go. So because once people learn Go PBL, they might say, okay, why should I switch from like Lucid to Apollo, or why should I switch from Haskell to Go? Like, what what would be the reason? And then for some other people, this might be the question. I'm doing this trick or this thing in the Lucid or in Atlas. Can I do it in Go as well? If not, how can I add it? How can I contribute to it? Where should I go and ask for it? Something like that.
Yeah, a question that was one of the workshops at Builderfest, and this is entirely for it was for Pragma, but the point was the goal I think should be the same. And that was the question or the purpose of the workshop is, how can we welcome contribution? Right. And that doesn't necessarily mean just saying, hey, thanks, we'd love you to contribute. It means like how do we actually make contributing welcoming? Right? Like what ways can you make it so that a new person coming in, it not only is able to take the things that you've written and use them, right, but also understand how they can participate back, right, like, oh, you found a bug, oh, you found it, or whatever, right, and how it can be two-way. Right. And the part here that I'm really talking about is like we're looking at this more from the project side, right? Like what can the projects do? How can you actually build your project to make it welcoming? How can you, right? Like what things can you put in to your project that, you know, gives confidence, like you said, right here, right, to the newcomer to your project.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm repeating myself. So yeah, we'll get that. Yeah, yeah. But this is so critical, right? And so our hypothesis with Andamio is really around this, right? Our hypothesis is if you go education first by saying, okay, look, here's examples, here's what works so far, then you're better guiding people towards the bleeding edge where the work is incomplete. And by the time they get there, they can say, oh yeah, okay, I understand, why this is incomplete. And now I am part of this journey. And yes, I would love to jump in and contribute.
Exactly, exactly. You know what's there and why, and then being able to, like you said, kind of make that leap from, okay, now what isn't there and why, and how can, like I help, how can I fix the things?
Love it. That's the pipeline right there.
Exactly, exactly.
So coming back to the top, if we provide the simple examples, right? We've already talked about some simple transaction examples using Apollo and then showing how Bursa can be used to wrap those examples. And Mix has provided examples of both. Chris and the team have provided examples of both in the workshop code. So that gets us into transactions. We talked about metadata. I'm not aware yet that we have like a simple go-to example of that. So that would be a fun thing to add, which, we have a dumb example of just parsing some metadata to JSON in Andamio CLI. And then we have the recommendation from Mix last week about which Apollo functions to use to add metadata to a transaction. But that would be a neat example to look at. Then we've got the starter kit, which still says SNEC on it for the moment, but it's the adder starter kit, right? So that's really, we already have an example. It's just a matter of how we want to package the entry point that gets people into that thing. What else?
Yeah, so that starter kit was actually more a receiver, which I need to kind of change it up. So you just ran SNEC or adder or whatever, and it was the receiver side, which is also why it's kind of stalled, is because I need to start writing UI.
Mhm.
So yeah, this is actually for receiving webhooks. So it was a webhook receiver was the idea. So
Right.
we should probably actually instead come up with a one that uses uses adder as a library.
Yes.
Right, because that would be what we're missing. So, instead of I think it even says like SNCC webhook starter kit or something like that,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Instead, we should just make a, adder starter kit that is straight up just using adder as a library, with like a little bit of filtering or whatever, and it can output to the screen, right? Like it doesn't need to go beyond that. So it's just adder, just enough to show people how to add inputs, outputs, filters, configure the pipeline, right?
When you think about the output for that or the UI, are you imagining like a terminal UI, or should we build like a simple little front end that allows people to play with a toy?
Oh, I was thinking not even a terminal I was thinking command line.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yep. That's perfect.
Yeah. Just because I wanted to keep it, similar to the Goroboros one,
Perfect.
where they're ridiculously simple and condensed. Because the idea here is to introduce the individual things, kind of, right? Like as like individual units. They're essentially hello worlds for the individual functionality and capabilities, right?
Yes, exactly.
And then we go from there, right, to things that are, more advanced,
Yes.
right? So
This
from
is, it's Chris, this is such a dream come true because anytime we've built any educational stuff at Gimbalabs, most of the time is dedicated to making these examples. And
yeah,
these isolated examples that you guys are already providing are absolutely golden. It's really, really cool. And they give us,
yeah.
right,
I mean,
once you have that hello world, you say, okay, well, we can build a lesson around that. We can say, here's exactly what you're going to do to the student.
right. I mean, so something like the workshop code, for example, and I mean, we intentionally split it in ways to where it's like when you go and you look at a section, you're like, oh, this section is essentially one library,
Right.
right? So it's like, oh, this one is Apollo, oh, this one is Adder, oh, this one, right? Like it's it's kind of interesting how easy it is like that. So it's definitely a good way to kind of build it, right? And I think we should kind of maybe make another couple of these, like example applications. Preferably something that actually interfaces with a smart contract, right? Would be good. And probably the other thing would be something we would want to discuss with Eduardo, and that is using he wrote some code for generating all of the Plutus data from icon blueprints.
Nice. Wow. Okay, good.
Right. So all we need is an example of that, right? Like it could literally be the icon hello world or whatever, right? And we just like, how do we do that? How do we take the hello world from icon and turn it into from the blueprint and turn it into Go?
Right. Oh,
And
that was actually on my list today. Yes, yes, yes. So wait, so what's he calling that?
it's part of Apollo.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So it's part of
Right.
Apollo. If you look, there's a directory. Give me just a second. In Apollo, and I mean we can look at it in a bit, but there's a directory in Apollo where he's got all of it, and there's like a little README, and it could use a lot more README.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. But do you
Right?
refer to Bluetooth encoder, Chris?
Yes,
No, that one.
I think so.
Yeah. Bluetooth encoder. It's a fun thing. We have spent nights on that.
Right, absolutely. But I mean, we should again just create like the simplest case,
Yeah.
right? Just so that we have, like to show, and we can obviously work on it from there. But the simplest case I think is enough to be able to actually, have a project that is like, here, clone this project and it will take this and do that, right? Because in a lot of cases, someone seeing something end to end, helps it click.
Yeah.
Rather than individual components.
Yeah.
So
And I should say that the serialization is the easy part. The hard part is deserialization, which
Yeah.
takes the data from the blockchain and convert it to Golang code or Golang type.
right.
That's the tricky one.
Yeah. So, we're working on that, right? Obviously, we've got our Cardano models, and the idea there with that stuff is to try not to necessarily specify like a model for everything out there, but to build wrappers and build stuff for this sort of thing. So we definitely want to get there. And then UTXO RPC. So the interesting thing about UTXO RPC is it's only like a component of this. Right, like it's UTXO RPC is almost like I mean, it would be like a replacement for Blockfrost or Kupo or right, like whatever your API is.
Mhm.
It doesn't actually help us build anything, right? Like it's just a standard for the query layer for
So
the API.
this is always the question, right? Like when we are educating developers,
Yeah.
you give them these hands-on examples because I agree, like you have to see the end-to-end example so you can build the mental model.
Right.
And then eventually you start using tools that abstract some of the details away, which is, obviously you appreciate it a lot more once you understand
Right.
how it is helping. but it's just better for future troubleshooting, right? If you want to onboard people quickly, sure, you can say, just drop this UTXO RPC function into your code. Don't worry about how it works, right? And
Right.
somebody might be able to quickly start building an application from that. But what we really want is to introduce any of these interactions or endpoints at the moment when the learner is already kind of appreciating what's happening under the hood. And then we say, well, okay, here's something that
Yes.
you're going to have to do frequently, and here's how UTXO RPC helps. By the way, this generalizes across languages, so you're learning even more general concepts right now.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of what we are starting with is we're starting with a Cardano node and that's it.
Right.
Right. And we are building Go code that interfaces with that. And so, the point being is we're directly talking with a Cardano node using Ouroboros and all this sort of stuff. And then like at a certain point, it's like, as you said, once you understand how all of that works at the plumbing level, say, okay, well, how can we simplify this a good bit? And, the answer is, oh, well, we don't necessarily need all of the chain interaction ourselves. Say I only want to build an application and I'm fine with hosting it, and I want to use Demeter or use any other thing like that. This is where UTXO RPC comes into play, right? And we can, again, you run it alongside Block Frost or like whatever, and show the advantages and or I'm not gonna say advantages, the trade-offs, right, between the different ones. Because I mean, right, like with exactly, because there's adder, and then we want to move to abstractions. Perfect. Yeah.
How does this, yeah, like as we start now to really outline a course that we're imagining, right? How does this feel to everybody? So Chris just suggested, let's just start with a node and interacting with it. We introduce that. We've got starter kits for that already. We can talk about like transaction submission. There's been some incredible highlights from the earlier sessions here where we talk about just that critical concept that a transaction is just a string of bytes. Wonderful. Now we can get people thinking about that. Then we say, okay, now that you understand it all comes down to the Cardano node, getting those bytes onto the wire. Let's talk about some simple transactions. Let's introduce a bit about monitoring. And these are two things that we then revisit as we continue to level up, right? Okay,
Right.
we know about simple transactions. Let's talk about validators, or let's talk about minting. Okay,
Right.
you can do this really basic, like example of looking at adder data. Let's talk about how to refine your query or to use that data for just-in-time production of an application. And then also along the way, then the abstraction work becomes something that we drop in over and over again. All right. You don't want to reuse this boilerplate over and over again, do you? Let's make it
No,
easy.
no, exactly. And we did just recently, Aurora made a quick change into adder. So now it actually provides the full block and transaction payloads in Ouroboros Go struct format. So in other words, every block event and every transaction event also includes the ledger.block, ledger.transaction of Ouroboros.
Yeah.
So you can just use all the right, like you don't have to do any conversions or anything anymore. It just naturally comes with it. So that means that, for example, to go from adder to UTXO RPC, right? You can take the block event block and .utxo RPC it.
Right.
Because we already have that conversion. So we're continuing to kind of work on that to where there are a lot of events, and the eventing system and how we can merge that with, just like the general way that like node updates work and that sort of stuff. And of course, I'm getting a little ahead of myself.
It's thrilling. Wait, can you say it again though? So the updates to adder mean that we have like the data, the response data from adders formatted in such a way that now it's consistent with all of the other libraries. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So by passing through, we basically expose the underlying Ouroboros or Goroboros Go
Mhm.
object representing like the blocks in the transactions. So before, like you would have to get the CBOR right from the adder,
Right.
and then you'd have to convert the CBOR back into the Goroboros block, even though like that's how it started, right? So Aurora short-circuited all of that, and now it passes the block in the transaction directly as the Go structure already. So you don't ever have to do conversions. It's already deserialized.
Yeah, that's the key. Okay.
Right, right.
And are passed as Go structs so that no conversions are needed. Yeah, that's thrilling.
It says conversations.
No, close.
Yep.
Cool. Going back to like if we
Yep.
think about a course outline, right? And what we're ready to start doing is saying, all right, well, here is the learning module that somebody's going to go through. From there, we drill down to the learning targets. And once you have a set of learning targets and you have example code already built, writing the lessons is trivial. It's basically doing what we're doing right now. Right? We talk through some details. We want to really apply this part, right? We are not here to transmit knowledge. Documentation already does that for people for whom that works. We're
Right.
here to pull people into an ongoing conversation that still has a lot of unknowns, and there's still a ton of work ahead, right?
Yeah.
That's how we're going to build this course successfully. And we already have like a shared vision for this. This is only successful if it actually helps people ask this question: how can I help? I'd love to help. How can I
Right.
help? And we even have funding set aside for this, right? We have the Fund 11 proposal, which is paying for just the work of delivering Andamio CLI and the course. But we have reserved 5,000 ADA from each milestone, a total of 25,000 ADA, to just give people a little financial incentive to support this. And this is a small experiment that we hope blossoms into something bigger, that goes towards answering this question. Hey, what would make me feel more welcome to contribute? Somebody saying, you know what? We got some symbolic funds for this. It's really exciting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So like the end goal of this course, right, is really this question right here. Arriving at how can I help? If we did this first, right, what are the prerequisites we might ask for? Would it be fair to assume that somebody who's enrolling in a Cardano Go PBL course has access to a node? Is it sufficient just to say to them, okay, here's a quick way to get access to Cardano CLI in Demeter. Here's how you spin up a starter kit in Demeter. Those several of these.
Yeah, I mean, I think with that free tier availability in Demeter, with a Cardano node, it makes it really easy, and you can spin it up and tear it down, as necessary. So it definitely works for being able to go through something like this and complete, like a course, and still have plenty of free credits left to go and, start helping, right? Like at the end.
Do we want to provide like an option that says, because like in the Plutus PBL course, which really isn't about Plutus, it's just we use that word to pull people into it.
Right.
But it's about just the basics of getting started as a Cardano dev. We introduce to people, okay, here's how you get a node running locally if you do have the bandwidth and processing power to do so. So we can link out from this, and we could say that
Right.
a prerequisite to this course is that you do have access to a node. Here's a reminder
Or
how to do it on Demeter. Here's
Yep.
a link out to how to run it locally.
Yeah.
But then once we say that, we say these are the prerequisites, what's the first thing we then ask people to do? So now, okay, well, you've got access to a node, you've got Goroboros. Is the Goroboros starter kit going to be the right place to start?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, perfect. So then we get into that. And we can now, around this, what I'll do offline in between meetings is go through this with the teacher crew over at Gimbalabs.
Right.
And we can kind of look at this example and say, okay, well, what is somebody learning, right? What is this example code actually asking somebody to do? We work through it step by step. We'll draft some learning targets, and I would love to bring a draft of those next week.
Right.
So then if this was like, we can call this like 101, could then a next module be 102? Hey, let's build our first few transactions.
Yes.
And then adder is an example that helps us. At the end of the day, how do you feel about the use of the word indexer here? Can we say like we're jumping into querying the blockchain? Obviously, you always want to be able to query events that have happened there.
Right.
Do we say that in the next module, we're going to show people how to start building an indexer, or is it something more basic than that?
Yeah, I think it's a little more basic than that. Let's see. So yeah, I mean, because the thing is what you're doing. Let's say reacting to chain events.
I like
Right.
that.
Because I mean, like that is what adder is, and sometimes, right, like it can be creating an indexer. Like in the case of our Builderfest workshop, right? Like it did a thing. It created a transaction and did something instead, right? So it's not always about an indexer versus like CDNSD, right? The name server is an indexer using adder as a library. It's just indexing all the events as they come through, right? Yeah.
Something like that. So we could,
Yeah,
we
exactly.
have this example built. It
Right.
watches the chain and it fires a transaction when a thing happens on chain. We can
Yep.
use that directly.
Yep.
And then we say, okay, other times you're not going to do anything right away, but you would like to have an index of a certain subset of events that happened. Adder can be used to do that, but it's not solely for that.
Right. It is bring your own indexer if you need to build one that is customized in some way. Versus where we get directly into the next one, right, is essentially moving into the abstractions. And what happens when you start using essentially someone else's indexer,
Right.
right? Whether it's from DB Sync, right, to Maestro and to Kupo to Dandelion to like whatever it at a certain point you're basically choosing a pre-created opinionated indexer at this point. Once you move to that, and that even includes UTXO RPC.
Right. In a different way.
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay.
Right. Because I mean, like you're definitely choosing, what you want to get.
And this is right. So we think of like 100 level modules as covering the absolute basics.
Mhm.
What do I need to do? Well, I got to understand that everything comes down to interacting with the node. Goroboros is for that. And then, well, one of the main ways people interact with the chain is through transactions.
Yep.
So we're going to have to know a little bit about those. And then we also want to be able to react to those events. We introduced a little bit here. That's a pretty incredible start. We've touched Goroboros, we've touched Apollo and Bursa.
Yep.
And then we touch Adder. And we say, okay, well, that's now you have a foundation. And you've seen some Hello World examples about all of these. Now let's start moving from those Hello World examples into actually producing something.
Right.
And when we do that, we naturally start to think about some of the abstractions that we can have. Obviously, using somebody else's indexer is always like one of those nice entry point conversations to
Right.
start thinking about trade-offs. That's beautiful. And
Yeah,
eventually we end up at this kind of abstraction of abstractions right here, which is UTXORPC.
Yeah, I mean, and then somewhere in here, whether it's directly this guy or like another places where we want to start talking about interfacing with contracts. Right. So I mean, building, building, much more complex or, not just simple transactions of, we're attaching datums now and, all of this sort of stuff. Right.
Beautiful. So,
Because by that point now, it's like you get to this point, and I know a lot of people will be like, okay, interacting with smart contracts is kind of like what they want to get to early, right? Like that's what they want to do. Let's get to that as soon as possible. But by kind of like building it this way, right, and then getting to the smart contracts last, it allows someone to really understand what they're building and making conscious choices on the trade-offs when they build their applications and their infrastructure and their whatever, right? Like, hey, do I just want to use UTXO-RPC on Demeter? Do I want to use a node on Demeter? Do I want to, build my own custom indexer for my application, right? Like what makes sense? And they'll know by that point, rather than going straight for like, oh, here's how you build transactions to talk to smart contracts, right? Because then no one will really go beyond that. And then obviously they definitely are going to arrive at, they're going to want to build, right? Yep. Beautiful. Yeah.
that's the course. That's it. So there might be a few other 200 levels. So like, what if we call this one queries? So I think this is a kind of a neat twist.
Mm-hmm.
We can say reacting to chain events. And then in the very next module, we can say, okay, more generally, you're always going to need to query the blockchain for one reason or another.
Right.
Often when you do, you won't need a custom indexer, which we already introduced, but you might use one that's provided by somebody else. Survey the options and how we connect those
Yeah.
to the Go code. We can do all of that. And then we can even say a word or two about UTXO-RPC. And these are all things that can we'll be circling back to these in a consistent way as we go.
Yeah.
Then after queries, we say, all right, well, really, you're not building an application if you're not interacting with smart contracts. Let's get into this.
Yep.
Now, things like datums and redeemers, for example,
That's almost a course in itself.
I was going to say, right? Like maybe that's right. So maybe there's like a 203 here, right? And it's all about serializing data of all kinds. Which is going to include datums and redeemers. It might include parameterized scripts.
Right.
advanced transactions.
Actually, I think let's put all the data on redeemers in every single module before the 203 in the traditional way of building this. I think Chris knows what I'm talking about. And then let the student beg for something to make this thing less painful. And once they reach to 203, and once they see, okay, there is this tool, Pultus encoder, I think the rush of adrenaline and dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, that combination would be amazing for them.
Yeah. So pulling in, like the Plutus encoder here. So like we introduce them and you're having to write them by hand
Yeah.
to match your stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like we said. So obviously our apps aren't going to be that advanced, and the idea is as we just keep going, we're allowing for more advanced code to be produced, for more advanced applications.
Yeah.
So we start with, oh yeah, sure, you want to build an actual application, but what really is it? And it's like, you can make it pretty simple. You can make it a swap app or something like that only has fairly simple interactions. And then we move on and we continue to move on to make it more and more complex.
And that story, right? So what we're showing you right now isn't going to quite get you to production. Let's keep going. And mix what you just described. Teachers know that as creating a need to know. Right? You always want to be telling a story so that people are on the edge of their seat. Oh, I can't wait till I have to learn that next thing. Of course, I want to know that. That's the magic trick. This is a pretty cool start. And so what I would like to do this week is draft an outline for this so that we can then talk next week about whether or not this represents the conversation we're having right now. And so it'll be fun to take a stab at that and get feedback from everybody next week to see how close it is to the mark. But this is a pretty cool start. Going back up here, we have these examples, and I think it's pretty clear that each of these will play a role in the course outline. We've got a couple of starter kits. Are there other tools that ought to be on this high-level list right here as stuff we want people to be playing with right away? Because we've got that. Right. Obviously, the Goroboro starter kit is on that list. But what else from the Cardano Go universe do people have to know about? Like at the same caliber as these?
As of right now, there's still the old 5 binaries Go Cardano serialization library. Which is actually used even in Bursa.
Excellent.
Yeah, so some of the like low-level primitives around addresses and some of the cryptography stuff they already had. So, like why rewrite it, right?
Cool. So yeah, linking to that, checking on the docs there, just making sure that's the kind of thing we want people to know that exists and at least encourage them to look under the hood so that
Right.
any dev who's ready to do that knows where they can go. That's another thing that I think has really been done beautifully over the last few sessions. Mix the way you're demonstrating to people how to read the CDDL and to diagnose some problems is really cool. So that was highlighted in some of the last few blog posts. Okay. The other thing that's happening in the background is little by little, we have a use case on the Andamio team that it's nice to be working on. And this is really the reason we named this project in the first place is this is just the best practice for building a course, right? We want to have a project example that's ongoing. We're not, on the one hand, we need the Hello World examples. On the other, we want to start providing as soon as learners are ready for it, some context for all those examples to start to be tied together. The fact that it's gonna be a helpful tool for our team is great, but that's a secondary outcome. What we really want is this to help frame our work. So a few things that we have the chance to look at here. We've talked about the reference scripts. My understanding, Mix, is that there have been some updates to Apollo, but we got to test those. And then obviously some other things we could keep this list going. But Mix, what are you thinking?
Yeah, in regards to this point, definitely it is. Unfortunately, I don't know where is it, Eduardo exactly. Maybe, as I said to Adrian, he's living in Alp mountains. Maybe he's having trouble crossing the mountains or something. For 3 days, I haven't heard from him. So still, I'm going to ping him about this reference script. But the other things is regards to kind of building background knowledge. Obviously, a user cannot just jump into Cardano PBL, right? Let's say he doesn't know anything and he just want to start with Cardano PBL. He or she or whatever has to come from other courses or finishing other courses. So I wonder first, what sort of module we need to bring to the Cardano PBL, which are already built in other courses. If not, which courses needs to be done, or which sort of background knowledge user needs to have in order to come to just not get frustrated that much. Definitely frustration is part of the journey, but not that much. Or, like I am having trouble of just installing Go version, I don't know, something, or, this thing, yeah, exactly, prerequisites. So that's a thing. And yeah, I think that's all for me for now.
Yeah, like setting up a Go environment
Mhm.
should be module 100,
Which is
right?
pretty easy. Like
That's the
it
beauty
should
of
be
it, right?
5 minutes, but
It will certainly take less time than setting up your Haskell developer environment.
absolutely.
We're confident about that. But it ought to be covered. So that's really good.
Yeah, for example, if they are using VS Code, what sort of extension? If they're using Vim or something,
Right.
what can help them in order to? But the other thing is that CDDL you mentioned. Do we want to touch on the CBOR? I mean, the low-level CBOR, like understanding the CBOR itself, like what the hell is this tag telling you? So that once they reach to the debugging, and the only tool they have is their CBOR, because Apollo, or actually none of these tools, gives you Bluetooth error. For example, Lucid, there is this so-called Bluetooth engine, so you can get your smart contract error and you can know like where exactly is the problem. But for example, Apollo, if your smart contract failed, you have no idea what's wrong. So you have to go through the CBOR, reading the datum, every single bit. So do you think that would be, or that is necessary to, with the debugging, reading? Like how get
Definitely in the 200s.
yeah, okay.
I mean, in the 100s, the idea is that we're starting with stuff where we're not going to point people at foot guns, right?
Yeah.
We're doing it so simple that it's a toy, right? It's not necessarily, again, it's not ready for production, right? We're 100s are definitely you're 100% just learning. You're slowly starting to build things that do stuff, but I mean, they're not real apps, right? None of this has a front end in any way. None of it would, right? Like none of it has a smart contract. So, the only place where we're really interacting is just by creating generic, simple transactions. And then we move to 200, and 200 is where, okay, now you go beyond, Cardano's just a wallet, ha ha ha, to Cardano has smart contracts.
Yeah.
Right. We move on to, and here's where you can also introduce, minting, burning, like anything like that, right? Would be kind of here. And because again, the errors, the rough points,
Yeah.
this is where you're going to really dig into that.
Where do you, so like if we have queries, smart contracts, deeper dive into serialization, maybe debugging actually fits, like this might all be one module or
Yeah, that's probably all together. So I would just
let's just do
CBOR
that.
and reading CBOR and CDDL, or debugging is just, that's all just one thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So then what about minting and burning in between these two or these two? What's your feel there?
I think it's just included in, so
Yeah.
included in
Oh,
202.
yeah, exactly. I was wondering like what sort of contracts we are going to interact.
Right.
Definitely a minting, definitely a spending. But do we want to bring some other contracts as well, like certifying, staking, all this sort of stuff, like how people can withdraw?
So
No.
Maybe.
I think the idea is not to showcase the breadth of smart contracts, but rather to make sure that we're covering just the interactions. So, like you said, minting and burning, makes sense.
Spending, of
Spending,
course.
right, of course makes sense. Exactly. And just making sure that we cover that, right? With the expectation that these things can also be chained together and can be, put together in various ways. And we're not covering that because that's really covering smart contracts and smart contract language versus just our interactions with it.
Okay. So here we don't give them tips or some sort of way to optimize their stuff. Like maybe that would be the 300 or I don't know, 400.
Partially. So it's partially that some stuff waits for later, but those tips, I think the experience that we have so far is that those tips are best shared in the moment. And that's why the live coding sessions are so essential, right? You can build up a course, you can build up lessons that give people the basics. If those lessons are done well, this is kind of the precursor to contribution. People are asking questions. People are showing up for the live coding sessions and saying, hey, what about this? What about that? Or I heard that you could fill in the blank. Those are the moments where all the advanced tips and tricks, you can follow learners anywhere. And Mix, you've already proven fabulous at doing that, right? Like you
Yeah.
know when to show people a tip or a trick or to go a little deeper down this direction. I don't think we have to write anything
Yeah.
explicitly, but we should always be thinking, okay, when learners get to this module and these lessons, they might have questions about X, Y, or Z. If that happens, we can have an example in our back pockets.
Okay. But James, a very quick question. In previous PBL, we had 100, 200, 300, and 400. Now we just kind of combine 200 and 300. So the 200 is basically that specialization and the 300 is contribution, right? Am I right? Am I getting this
And
right?
yeah, so right, this is not a scientific classification, but what we played with originally is let's call 100 onboarding, let's call 200 building background knowledge. And then we could say that 300 is where people start to specialize so that 400, they could start to contribute. In reality, that specializing and contributing always has, there's too blurry a line between those things to really distinguish. So what we
Okay.
started really thinking about is, okay, once you've been onboarded, right? You've played with the toys, and then you've gone a little deeper, you have sufficient background knowledge. Now you're ready to dip your toes into contribution. All of us know that the moment we start contributing to something, that's really where our special expertise starts to be developed, right? And so we want to have some nice, safe opportunities for people to dip their toes in, and specialization is going to be kind of a byproduct of that. Well, this is pretty incredible. Thanks. It felt like it would be good to have kind of a framing and stepping back session today. I really appreciate y'all for spending time this way. Yep, Chris got to drop too. Thanks for this conversation, y'all. What I'll do, I'll share asynchronously a little outline of the course. I'll polish this off and publish it within the next day or two. And hopefully we can draw on this to do some specific example building and documenting starting next week. Love starting the week this way. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah. Thank you, James. Thank you, everyone. Have a
Take
great
care,
day and
everybody.
night.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.